I'm gonna go ahead and start, and y'all can interrupt me anytime, so don't feel bad about it. So I'm gonna go over pretty much the basics of PHP and everything it entails. So obviously very elementary. What is PHP? And it's a server-side scripting language, and it's designed for primarily web development. I thought this was funny. The abbreviation of PHP is still PHP, and then they add hypertext processor. So the P still stands for PHP. So I thought that was funny. I didn't know that. Like I mentioned last week, the technology is open source. It's not the only one. There's other languages that are also open source, but what makes PHP stand out from the others is that it's adopted like way more on. And if you look at it in percentage of websites, it's over 80% of websites. Of course, as WordPress has a lot to do with it because, as you guys know, you don't really need to know PHP to run a WordPress site. There's like a lot of do-it-yourself themes and plugins, so it kind of takes away the development aspect of it, but it's still running PHP, and someone's still going to need a PHP developer when it comes to customizing it. So the reality of job opportunities, PHP is definitely great at it. The other ones are also really good, but PHP, there's a need for it. Also, this is recent too, so it's not like an old graph or anything. And then also I want to be clear as far as when you think of PHP, don't think of front-end development. So front-end should just strictly be HTML, CSS, JavaScript. It has nothing to do with the server. You can run it locally without a web server. So that's just front-end development. And then you have server-side development, which obviously includes PHP, but there's also other languages like Ruby, Java, Python, and ASP.NET. So those are kind of like the bigger ones. There's more, but these are definitely other popular ones. The file extension is .php. Once this file exists on the web server, it will know and if PHP is installed, it will know what to execute once that extension is in place. So you can't have a .html file, essentially. And then just to kind of break it down, if you're on a computer browser and you're trying to access a website, it's going to make a HTTP request to that server. And if that server has a PHP file, it's then going to execute, line by line that's on that PHP file. And what the key here is, what gets returned back to the browser is not any PHP. You don't get any of that. You just get the final result of it. So you can have 10,000 lines of PHP that get executed on the web server, but what gets actually returned back to the user is just HTML. It could be nothing, or it could be something, but they're never going to see any PHP script. So none of that's going to ever be exposed to your user, whoever's visiting your site. Of course, the more scripts you have on there, the longer the processing it will take. So, but you get the point. Another, also a big point to realize is that PHP is executed in a synchronous method, which basically means you cannot have multiple scripts run at the same time. So if you have, again, like 4 functions or 4 scripts run in that PHP file, it's gonna run one at a time. So if one throws an error, that means the following ones will not execute. Basically, it'll kind of shut off at that point. The page will, not the site, but just that page that you're seeing would throw an error. And essentially the same thing. You can't run multiple things at the same time. Does that make sense? The other ones like Node.js, those are ones that you can run. Those are asynchronous type languages that you can actually run or execute multiple scripts at the same time. So that's really a big difference when you look at PHP. And then, of course, we we're doing web development, so it's PHP is suited for HTML, but really it's like PHP is definitely way more than that. Like it's not just to execute, or sorry, not execute, but to render HTML on a page. It's got tons more abilities. For example, it'll handle forms, like submitting forms, what to do after the form submitted. You can upload photos. You can send emails. Obviously, make calls to databases. And a really cool one is create files and directories. So you can do all of these things on the web server without seeing it happen on the page. So it's very powerful stuff. In this example, you can actually see PHP output a PDF file. Have y'all done that? Or yeah. So this is definitely a really great web feature when you have like some kind of application that wants to maybe fill out a job application after you fill out a form, or you want to create a iCal invite or something. So you want to create a file that has information of the event or something like that. You can actually use PHP to create these things and store them locally. You can force download or have the person click on it or send an email with a link to it. So it's definitely a lot of possibilities with PHP on how you do that. Another big thing is are y'all experienced with JSON or XML? So those are also really big on creating web applications. JSON's huge. XML is basically like the old school. So you still need to learn it because there's a lot of older services that still use XML, and in order to interact with them, you need to use the XML language. But JSON is definitely the one that has been the game changer in it, and that one will be probably the one that will withstand that for a long time. And learning JSON is definitely recommended. And you can create them, obviously, with PHP. And another thing, too, is PHP turned 20 years in 2015 and saw the release of PHP 7. That was a big deal because it was basically making PHP run faster. That was a lack of PHP. That was slow, so that's why you got these asynchronous languages like Node.js that popped up, and people wanted to make the switch. They created content management systems on those platforms. But with PHP 7, that allowed like WordPress and other platforms to be back in that I guess that fast-paced performance world. In which one's better? They're always competing. Which one's like the phones? Like is my Google or Apple phone faster or whatnot? And here's just like a quick graph of what WordPress 4.1 looked like at the time when you run it on PHP 7. So you can actually see like it's more than doubled the speed, and that's a big impact. Like I remember you said last week, one of your sites was not your sites, but the ones that you're working with.
Site,
it's like So another big thing too is if they were to switch the web server to use PHP 7, that'll also make an impact on without doing any development. So that's another thing too with WordPress. When you're looking at hosting and stuff, definitely keep an eye out for PHP 7. A lot of plugins though, they still have to support I think 5.3, 5.4 because they depend on other plugins, and you can't have one plugin that's still dependent on 5.4 and the other ones that are more modern and they're good on PHP 7. So that's a thing. Like you have to figure out which plugins you're using to know to be able to use PHP 7. So that's another factor there as well. And then of course you need a web server to run PHP. Apache is mainly the one that you would use to run a web server. And then of course you have on your computer MAMP and WAMP. So with those, it's easier because you just install the program and you click a button and then boom, there's a web server on your computer. You can access it locally. I'm sure you guys knew this already, but like A means Apache on both of these programs, and that's essentially what it is. You can modify the configuration, the properties in there to try to imitate as best as possible an actual web server, because you got to also remember when you're running your either WordPress or you're running your PHP scripts on WAMP or MAP, you can't guarantee that's going to work exactly the same on an actual web server, because these other web hosting companies have their own configurations, their own settings, their own limitations. Like when you want to upload a photo, it might be limited to 2 megabytes on your computer, but on there it might be like 1 or something, I don't know. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Like just because your function works on your local machine doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work on the actual website. And then these are the directories where they're going to be located. So MAP has htdocs within the MAP directory, and then WAMP has www directory. And then the URL address is just the port number, which is 48 on there. You can customize that as well. I never do. I've never really played around with it, but you can customize it if you guys like to do that kind of stuff. And then I know some of y'all have websites up. Who do y'all use?
GoDaddy.
You use GoDaddy for hosting?
And I've just had them for years, so I'm
Yeah.
just kind of sticking with them.
Cool.
They're definitely slower than some other ones.
But it works.
But it works.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's up. Your site's up.
Yeah. Yeah. I just am setting up a Ubuntu server at home.
Nice.
And I want to transfer one of the domains to my home server to just go through those motions.
Cool. That's awesome. Okay.
See what happens with that.
Yeah. And then, well, right, but they're the same, right? Because they got out. But yeah, have you been with them for a long time?
Yeah.
Like when they were actually.
Yeah, when they were better.
When they were better. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. And then, Andy, do you what do you use? Huh? Bluehost. Okay, Bluehost. And I think
I use HostGator.
HostGator.
But also at work I use Flywheel.
Flywheel, yeah.
And then I'm also use
All kinds of
WP Engine.
WP
I would love to use them, but they're expensive.
They're great. They're worth it.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah.
But here, I guess what I want to focus on, those are WordPress. Even GoDaddy has WordPress specific hosting.
Yeah.
And here, what I want you guys to focus on is general host, like web hosting, not specific. Because when you're going to host a WordPress site, you want to choose a WordPress specific hosting company because they already know the vulnerabilities that someone's going to attack your site. So they already kind of block ports for you. They already know what URLs they try to log in with. So they already have all the security features to like eliminate those risks for you. But in here, what I really want you guys to focus on is these are just web hosting, and that will run PHP for you. So there's managed hosting, which basically means you don't have to do anything other than pay them every month, and they'll give you basically a space for you to upload your files, and either you can have a domain or not, but you at least have a space for all your PHP files. And then you have virtual servers, or more where you actually spin the web server up, just the same way you do it on your computer using MAP. And the difference is, and this is a company called DigitalOcean, and there's other ones like Linode. And have y'all looked at Amazon at all? So Amazon is also another big game changer in web hosting, and honestly, any web service like file resources, like image resources. So they're called like CDNs, database hosting. You can actually point your domain at Amazon, and they can host it for you. They have everything, like every web service you might need. Sending emails, you can use them for it, and they're super cheap. But anyways, you would use a service like that to spin up a server, but it's really great because you have full control. It's not in a shared environment where if you have I want to say like maybe 100 other users also on that server or something like that. It's just you primarily. You get to boot it up, shut it down whenever you want. You have full control. You can install whatever you want on it. You're not limited to do anything you want. So the difference between Manage is that Manage, they do all the updates and patches and everything, all the security. This one, you have to do everything yourself. So, but it's really great to kind of understand what that process is. So I definitely recommend looking at trying these companies out. And they have tutorials that are like broken down, like step by step. So there's like, you don't need me or anybody for that kind of stuff. It's really awesome. And now just the syntax for PHP, the opening tags and closing tags is just the arrow and then the question mark and then the term PHP, and then just to close it like that. This is obviously going to break if you don't close it, if you're going to do some kind of inline PHP scripting, but I know you guys get the point there. Comments is very crucial. Like for me, it's very crucial when you write scripts or any kind of PHP statement. I always recommend to comment them somehow. It's beneficial for you. It's beneficial for your teammates. That way, a year from now, or even like I don't know, maybe a month later or something, like you know what you did at that day. So I know with Git you have the ability to see what history you did, but here when you actually see in the file, you don't need to see any history. You can actually see in the file what you did. So you can do that with 2 forward slashes. You can do that with the hashtag. And then you can do multi-lines with forward slash and an asterisk. So you can write as much comments as you want. So that's a real essential workflow, I think. Also, I don't know if you guys have tried this, but like you can add as many spaces as you want. Like PHP does not care how many spaces you put in there. That I don't recommend it. It doesn't look good. It doesn't help anybody but if you needed to like space it down to just, maybe you have like a list of some sort of maybe strings or variables happening and just visually, it just makes sense to like line them up line by line. That's obviously useful because PHP doesn't care for it. But for something like this example, one should be at the top. It shouldn't be broken down. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, if you're someone like me, I reflexively hit the spacebar after I do something. I type something and then I hit spacebar.
Yes.
And this is a lot of things up in HTML. So
Yeah, you won't mess up it. Yeah, so you'll have all the spaces you want there. And then statements are ended by the semicolon. If there's no semicolon, it's going to think that you're still writing a PHP statement. So it's just going to keep going until it sees that semicolon. So same thing, that semicolon could be at the line break, or at the next line or something, but it needs a semicolon there. So I was saying like variables, this like was it the quadratic formula? Like this is basically variables. Like this is what you kind of like learn from the beginning, where you have to fill in the blanks for these letters, and that's essentially what they are. Variables are containers for storing data, and the first type of variable is a text string. Text string can be wrapped within either double quotes or single quotes. This is another thing too. Just like I guess in the development type thing, I'm big on like spacing of how you write your code. So one way to space things out are 2 spaces, or or using tabs. So if you use tabs, every text editor treats it differently, right? Depending on how you see your the configuration you have for your text editor. But I'm not saying that's a problem. Just saying that you should stick to one, and that way you're consistent as you write your code. So if you use tabs, use tabs. If you use spaces, use spaces. And then same thing goes with strings. If you're going to use double quotes, use double quotes. If you're going to use single quotes, use single quotes. That way you don't have several lines that are inconsistent. That'll just kind of trick your mind as you're going through your code. And also same thing with teammates. That also is helpful to know like the consistency of how you write your code. Huh?
You can set your
Yeah,
web.
you can. Yes, yes. Like a default, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank God.
The other variable type is an integer. So this one's a non-decimal number and should have at least one digit and can be either positive or negative. That one's pretty straightforward. Float variable type is essentially the integer type, but with the decimal point. So you have a decimal place for it. Booleans you're going to use a lot, and it's basically true or false. That's all it is. So it's either true or false. You can notice that there's no quotes on it. The minute you put quotes on true, it becomes a string. It's no longer a Boolean anymore. So if it's just the word true or false, PHP will know you're talking about a Boolean type of variable type. Arrays are essentially just a way to store multiple values. So in this example, you have a list of cars, and they're all text strings. They're just strings, but they're comma separated out. And we use the word array and wrap it within parentheses. So notice here I'm using new lines, so there's a lot of spaces happening there. That doesn't have to happen. It could all be one line with no spaces in there. But this looks more readable when you're developing. As a 5.4 PHP, you can actually use brackets. So if y'all have done JavaScript, this looks that's how JavaScript does it. So that's another cool thing about learning PHP. You're learning also JavaScript in a way. So you can kind of stick with what works in both. That way you can kind of copy code over if you needed to. And it's also less writing. You don't have to write the word array. Objects are a bigger concept, and we're going to go over them later, like in weeks. But basically, it's an object. An object is a data type which stores data and information on how to process that data. In PHP, an object must be explicitly declared. So we have to first declare the class object. So you can see here in this example, we have that term class, and I labeled it car, but it could be any term. It can be class. Obviously, it cannot be class again. And then you surround it with braces there. You can do a lot of things within an object just for presentations purposes. I'm just showing. I'm declaring a variable called model, and that equals to a text string called Volkswagen. And the term public is just saying this is a public variable that this object can output. You can hide things. So in other words, like maybe they're just like internal properties that you don't really want to expose. And so there's little techniques that you can use to make these public and be helpful when you use them. And then to actually call that class, you would actually use the word new. So I'm creating a variable called Herbie equals new, and then car, and then I'm executing the object using the parentheses. So now my variable Herbie is now equal to this object. I created a new object called that's based off this object called car, and I can do things with it. And then again, right now it's a very basic example, but and I think with WordPress you do this, right? How to reference properties, but basically it's just a dash and an arrow, and then you can call a variable or a function. So in this case, I set an internal public variable called model, so I can actually say Herbie and then reference model to that, and it'll actually output VW. So if I run this code, it will execute and display VW on it. Yeah.
What if you don't put public? Do you have to put something that's required?
It depends on because that's the thing with PHP. It's like very. It depends on the configuration, like what version you have. But I'd probably assume that if you run it probably on WAMP or MAMP or something, it's probably going to show without using the word public. So it depends. And then, but yeah, I would say try it out and then see what, like, depending on which one you're on. But if it's more strict, like if you have some kind of like more strict execution in PHP or different, or maybe more, maybe PHP 7 might also be more stricter, probably for security reasons. They might not display it. So, but yeah, I would definitely suggest like try it out on it. And you can do a lot more, like the public and then setting up variables, like the very basic of what you can do with an object. But yeah, so here the thing I just want to focus on is the variable type is an object. And then null is also one that you'll use a lot. But basically it's just that. It's just you're basically saying it's nothing. But it's still a value. So PHP still treats it like a value. And usually you would do it when you want to set a variable to something, but you don't really have a value yet. So you would say like score equals null, and then later down the road, if it's a game or something, you can add a point to it or something like that. So, or vice versa, if you have a value and you want to reset it to be nothing, you can override it and then equal it to null, and that's that.
How does it treat that differently than you say 0?
So if you were to have 0, well, really it's what you're going to do with it. So let's say if it's 0, and you want to, and then later, and I'm gonna go over this too. If you write a condition, so if you say like, if the variable equals null, then do this. But if it equals 0, might be a different condition. So it's really up to you. So there's no right or wrong. So you could say 0. But it would make sense if there's a reason why you set it to 0.
Or if it was a string.
Or a string, or an empty, like just double
quotes.
quotes.
A string isn't mathematical, so you would have null
Yes.
as an equivalent to 0.
Right. Yeah. So so any of those options are not wrong. It's just more what makes sense for whatever you're building for that value. So either one works, obviously, right? Because maybe if you say echo, 0 would echo out. But if it's an empty
Null.
string, it'll be, or null, it'll just be empty. Yeah. So they're not necessarily wrong. It's just what reason you have behind it. And then declaring variables, you need the $sign. That's crucial for a variable. Without it, it won't know. I think in JavaScript, you have to say var and then the variable name. So here, you need that $sign. And then a variable name can have a short name like X and Y, or more descriptive name like age, car name, total, underscore volume, something like that. So it can be very short or very long. A variable name must start with the letter of the. A variable name must start with a letter or the underscore character. A variable name cannot start with the number, and a variable name can only have alphanumerical characters and underscores. So which one can y'all tell that is the one that won't work? Yes. So that one will not work. But if you put an underscore before it, it'll run. So that's one thing to know. Also, variable names are case sensitive. This is also very important. You're going to go through this, like especially like misspells and all the crazy stuff that happens in development. But in this specific case, these 3 lines are all different. If you were to call one, it's going to tell you the value of which one you called on. So if I say echo and then the first one, just age all lowercase, it's going to echo out 25. So they're not the same, even though they look the same. Does that make sense? To actually print out or echo out information, it's the word echo and print. What I was saying, print is essentially the same thing. The only difference between that and echo, it returns like a 1 or a true value. So I personally always use echo, but you can use print. You can also do parentheses around it. But essentially, they all do the same thing. You just want to echo out information. And then to echo out a variable, you just say echo and then the variable name. And then when using single quotes, sorry, no, let me go back. Yeah, so you can include variable inside a text when running echo. So in this example, you have to use double quotes. So if you use double quotes and you put the variable in there, it'll actually output the value of that variable. But if you use single quotes, it'll output the variable name. So it won't actually run the variable, if that makes sense. So that's one thing to know too. I personally don't put the variable inside of it. I'm gonna show you other ways how to mix these things together, but that's one trick. In case you see it or you do it and it doesn't run, look out for which quotes types you use. And then this is the other way, when you concatenate, basically it's just a period between the text string and the variable. So like in
this is more common, right?
This is more common. Yeah, you're definitely going to see this a lot. And really, like for me personally, I feel that it just you like explicitly see where the variable is at. If it's in the text string, you're going to miss it somehow when you're just kind of skimming through, especially if you have like tons of text or copy in that page, you might miss it. But here with the text editor, you're going to, usually they'll have the color coding to see the difference between your text string and your code and the periods. So here it's easier to catch where your text splits and your variable. So yeah, so this one's definitely more popular. And then same thing with the spacing. You can have multiple spacings or no spacing. As long as that period is in between it and there's nothing else other than spaces, PHP will know that you're connecting those together. You're concatenating them. And then for operators, for these type of operators, basically just you're doing your addition, subtracting, multiplication, division, and then modulus. Modulus is basically the difference between the number before the second one. I personally haven't really used. Maybe I've used. Oh, you know what? I would use it for creating when you have like rows in a design and you want like the odd one being like a different background color. But you can do that with CSS now. Like you can do like crazy things with CSS. So like a lot of that PHP part of it is kind of getting eliminated. So you're definitely going to be using addition and multiplication way more, I think, in your development. This one's really big. So the comparison operators, where you are going to compare things, but one thing to note is when you have triple equal signs, it's not only comparing them, but also the type. So that also might give you a false response when you're comparing things. So keep that in mind when you see, and on JavaScript, you have to use, at least when you're in strict mode, you have to use three equal signs to compare two values. And then not equal to is just exclamation point and equal sign. Greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. No questions on? Very good. Cool. And then another trick too, when you're doing like a for each statement, you can increment or decrement integer type variable. So if x equaled 1 and you add 2 plus signs next to it, it'll increment the value. So it'll go from 1 to 2, and then it'll go downward 2 with the 2 minus signs. The logical operators are essentially if you want to have multiple comparisons in one line, you can add these statements. So it'll be like and, or the double and symbol, or the double pipe key, and then the exclamation point if you're saying the opposite. So the exclamation point is basically if you have a variable type that's a Boolean, so if it equals true or false, you can put exclamation point behind it or in front of it, and then it'll do the opposite of that. So that's what that one is for.
So you can actually use the word and or.
Yeah,
I've never seen that before.
yeah, same here. Like the double and the pipes are the ones that
Yeah.
that we use the most for sure. Yeah, a lot of these like I go in and like try them out. I like for commenting. I didn't know the hashtag was one or something. I mean, I've seen it in other languages, but then here I was like, oh, did that work? And it works. So yeah. And then same thing with the concatenation. You use a period, but also too, if you have a text variable that equal text, or sorry, a string, and you want it to add to it, you can restate that same variable and then add dot equals, and it'll append that value to the initial one. So it won't overwrite it. So if like variable 1 equaled Mark, and then you said variable 1 dot equals space Martinez, that first variable, because you restated the same variable, but you're saying dot equals, it's just adding the last name to that. So you can do that, and you'll see this too. Like you'll have like multiple lines when you just want to keep adding to that one string. Also, it's really great when you're doing more dynamic stuff. So if you have a dynamic like description or something like that, depending on what the user selected in their profile or something like that, you just want to keep adding what they selected in their description. That way it looks like in a sentence format. You can use this method to keep adding to that sentence with like a comma before it or something like that. So conditional statements. So programming is all about conditions, and what I saw online was pretty cool. We have like these if statements in our minds all the time. Like we go through them. So like if it's raining, then get a jacket. Like that's basically what we say to ourselves all the time. Like we're doing these if statements all the time. So that same example that Bill Gates said, computer program is a little bit of math and some if statements. So like that's essentially what it is, and it's true. Like if you look at your final code, like you're just seeing a bunch of conditions of what it does. And it's real simple. It's just basically the word if, and then you put your condition within a parentheses. And then just like before, you can have multiple conditions within one, but this is just a basic example of that. And the code that runs in it has to be wrapped within the braces. And then if the statement executes, if the if statement executes some code, if one condition is true. So here you have an example of a variable called cars, and it equals to an integer of 1. And the condition or the if statement is if there's more than one car, we're good, let's go. You can also run else statement. So you can say like if car is greater than 1, else, you can't go to the movies. So it's basically the false part of it. And then, does that make sense? And then you have your else if statement, which basically you can have as many of these, and essentially they're just multiple conditions between the if and else statement. So you can have your first initial if statement, and then else if your condition, and then you can keep going if you wanted to, and then at the end, or you can have your else statement, which is basically like the very final, like it didn't mark true for any of the above conditions. This is the last resort basically, and that last else statement is optional, so that's not required. It's just if you need it. So it's like basically none of the above worked. An easier way to do this is called a switch. Basically, a switch is running these conditions, but in a more structured way. So the way to do this, you basically type the word switch. You put your variable that you want to run the switch on, and then you create the opening and closing braces. And in each scenario or in each case, you would put in what the value could be, and depending on that value, you could run or execute your code. So in this case, we're talking about the weekday, which in that case it's Friday, and then we'd run the switch. And if the case is Monday, then it would say like need coffee. This word break is also a key word in this. If break is not in there, it's going to keep running the switch. But since it is in there, and if today was Monday, the switch script would stop running. That's where it ends. If it's not Monday, then it'll keep going through the next case. So if it's Friday, it'll do what it needs to do. And then same thing like the else statement from the if statement. Default is the one that's, if none of the above ran, this is what it will execute. So that's kind of like the final resolution of what the switch will do. That's also optional. That's not required to have. But it's just one of those cases like, there could be these top 3 scenarios, but if it's none of those, I want my script to do this. So that's what that default. And obviously there you don't need a break because it's at the very end. That's the final phase of it.
Okay, I got it.
Are you sure?
So if you don't put a break in, does it just stop and skip it, or does it wait till it's Monday?
If sorry, what was
If
that?
you don't put a break in,
Mhm.
does it just stop and skip the whole thing, or does it wait till it's Monday and then?
If there's no break, it'll just keep going through the next case, and then it ends.
Okay, so
And then
it just
Oh yeah, it
it
stops.
doesn't check the actual variable; it just keeps going.
Well, so it does check the variable at the very beginning, and then you set your scenarios if it equals one of those. But if none of them match, then nothing happens.
Break is a way to get out of the switch.
If the condition true, yes.
Okay.
If one of the conditions is true,
Yeah.
then it'll
Break
stop.
is the way out.
Break
and
is the way out.
It'll just go down to the end of the curly brackets and start
continue
there.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you had like 1,000 of these cases,
Yeah.
and the very first one matched true, and you had a break there, it'll stop.
Okay, so
It'll-
it prevents it from just checking each thing. Okay.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't usually use switch ever. I
Mhm.
always use
If else.
But you can do the same thing with both of them, right?
Right, yeah, like, and this example is exactly the same thing. So if day equals Monday, it runs that code. Else if day, like I misspelled it. I didn't put the equal sign.
Yeah.
If equals Friday, it'll equal that. Else, or like a default, it would be. So yeah, so you could write those same if statements
So,
in a switch.
but if it finds, it does the same thing as break in here. If it finds it, it'll stop running here, right?
Yeah, same things. Well, here, it's gonna keep running
All the way to the end.
all the way to the end.
So it runs the whole thing.
Yeah.
But even though it found, like, say it is Monday.
Right. Like it's still gonna check.
Ah,
Compared to switch, it won't even check anymore. So here it's gonna keep going through each scenario. It's not gonna output anything because the statement wasn't true, but it'll still check. It'll still run through it.
So are there like programming,
Like best practice.
like is it better to, like, say you have 1,000 lines?
Yeah.
It's better to do switch if you don't want it to be slow.
It'd be quicker,
It'd be
wouldn't
quicker,
it?
yeah.
Because it's gonna exit that. Okay.
Yeah. It'd be more in performance. Yeah.
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 Okay.
And also too, thing to know that you can't, like, say in if statements you can do multiple conditions. So I can say if day equals Monday and user equals 15 or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
So you cannot do that with the switch. So switch is very explicit. This is my variable. This is my scenario, my case. So you couldn't run multiple conditions in each scenario. So that's another thing too. In that example that you're thinking about,
Yeah.
if you have multiple conditions, you couldn't just switch it to a switch statement. But if you can, it makes sense to do it that way. But yeah, I think that's those are pretty much it. Like just want to go over the variables and the variable types and the conditions. Conditions, like I said, you're gonna be writing them like left and right. There's so many things, and there's another things that we're gonna go over later in the weeks is more like running functions that will eliminate having to maybe have 1,000 if statements, and so another patterns and other ways to like write your code.